Well, hello, everyone. I just wanted to post a video with just a few comments about our first reading by Epicurus. His letter to Menoikus. Epicurus was an ancient Greek philosopher, rough contemporary of Plato. But whereas Plato left us more than 24 complete and finished literary dialogues, or philosophical dialogues that are very literary, Epicurus, very little of his work survives. Apparently, he wrote a lot, but it just didn't make it. Just didn't survive. And this is one of the very few things that did. His letter to a friend named Menoikus. And I just want to tell you, I consider this to be a masterpiece, a very quiet masterpiece. One of the things we'll look at later on is a dialogue by Plato named the Phaedo, which is a fairly substantial dialogue, fairly long dialogue, in which Plato defends the notion that the soul is immortal and that the soul, or the essence of the human individual, survives death. And it's sort of jam-packed with arguments. It's a masterpiece. It's a great work of philosophy. Yet here, in which one of Plato's contemporaries, another philosopher, takes the very opposite position, that there is no survival of death, that death is the absolute and complete annihilation of the human being in totality. Taking that opposite position argues it in just a few sentences. And I'm not saying that Epicurus is right necessarily and that Plato was wrong, but I think it's telling and extremely interesting that Epicurus was able, in my opinion, to formulate a very substantial argument about the nature of death. Again, being the absolute end of the human being. In a few sentences where Plato, who took the opposite position, wrote a long dialogue with a dozen or so distinct arguments trying to prove that the soul does survive death. And again, I'm not saying who's right and wrong here, but it's an interesting comparison. The letter itself I find to be just remarkable in general. Even its, the exhortation to this friend, who I imagine to be a younger man, Menoikus, although I have no idea, to do philosophy, to live in in the right way, the Epicurean way, to seek wisdom, to live a life of pursuit of the natural pleasures and peace and absence of pain, the whole substance of Epicurus's larger philosophy. But what we're really interested in really is what happens here in the third paragraph, which is really about all he really has to say about death. But boy, there's a lot there. Let's just read it. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us. That death is nothing to us. Why would he say that death is nothing to us? For good and evil imply awareness, and death is the privation of all awareness. That is, for something to be good for us or bad for us, to be a good for us or an evil for us, at the very least, we have to be aware of it. For instance, an unconscious pain wouldn't really make any sense. For something to be a pain for you, you have to be aware of it. If you're not aware of the pain, you're not feeling any pain, so it's not a pain for you. Presumably, for us to derive pleasure, for something to be a good for us, we have to at least be aware of it at some level. If we're totally unconscious of it, then how can it be good for us? So for something to be a good or an evil for us, it would seem that to have that kind of significance, at the very least, we need to be aware of it. But what is death? Death is the privation of all awareness. It's the taking away of all awareness. That is, the very nature of death is the end of all consciousness. Death is the termination of all experience, all awareness, and all consciousness. So it couldn't be an evil for us because we never really experience it. It is an ending or termination, and it's an ending or termination of our consciousness. So the argument there is that it's nothing to us. It has no value, good or bad. It's nothing to us. It's nothing we'll ever experience. Therefore, a right understanding of death, a right understanding that death is nothing to us makes the mortality of life enjoyable, which is a remarkable thing to say. That is, we should be glad. I mean, it makes it enjoyable to be mortal, to be the kind of being that dies. Not by adding to life an unlimited time, but by taking away the yearning after immortality. That is, if death is not a bad, and immortality is just deathlessness, the absence of death, then why would we yearn after immortality if immortality, the only thing it saves us from, is something that's not bad to begin with? For life has no terror for those who thoroughly apprehend that there are no terrors for them in ceasing to live. If death is just the cessation of life, if it is this termination, then there's nothing to be afraid of. Foolish, therefore, is the person who says that he fears death, not because it will pain when it comes, but because it pains in the prospect. That is, there are things in life that are legitimately frightening. Getting your leg broken, a root canal, someone else's death. All these things can cause pain, suffering, sorrow, negative experiences. The only way death can cause a negative experience for us is if we dread it and we let the prospect of it pain us, worry us, give us anxiety or sorrow or sadness. Because death itself, again, if indeed death is best defined as the end of all awareness, will not going to hurt. I mean, dying might hurt, but death is different from dying. Dying is part of life. I mean, it's not a particularly part of life that we particularly look forward to, but it's part of life. And some people die in pain. But death itself is never painful because death is the end of all experience, including pain, including pleasure. He continues, whatever causes no annoyance when it is present causes only a groundless pain in the expectation. Again, why would you, if death is nothing to us in the sense that it's nothing that we will ever experience, because it's the end of all experience, then why would you let it ruin or cast a shadow on one moment of life? Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, and that's said ironically, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death has not come. And when death has come, we are not. It is nothing, then, either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exist no longer. That is incredible, I think. I mean, again, these are only a few sentences, but they present a very powerful view of the nature of death. It's nothing to us. Why? Because when death comes, logically that means, when we exist, that logically means that death has not come. Okay, as long as we are, death is not. It's not come yet. And when death does come, we are not. We don't exist. I mean, our existence and death are logically exclusive of each other. If we exist, death has not come. And if death has come, we don't exist. So there's no overlap between me and death, or my life and death, my experience and death. When we are, death is not come. And when death has come, we are not. It's nothing then, either to the living or to the dead. For with the living, it is not, because they're living. And the dead don't exist anymore. So it's nothing to them either, because nothing is anything to the dead, because they don't exist. Sometimes I like to think of Epicurus's view about death as I call it annihilationist, in the sense that what he's presupposing here is that the human being, in his or her totality, body, mind, spirit, whatever you want to call us, ceases to exist absolutely when death comes. We are annihilated, literally made into nothing at death. But that notion of being annihilated is not something that Epicurus feels that it would make any sense